And yes, we are live with another episode of The Dictators. It's Thursday. We've got one more to go. Tomorrow, however, will be a longer one. We're going to kick off at 2 o'clock UK time. Dave's going to join us at 3 at the normal time, but I'm doing a longer live stream, which will be put onto IWI and Silicon Curtain, and we'll have other guests dropping in at various points. And my friend Yuri Rashkin will be with us as well. And we're doing fundraisers for Jiggers Poor and Calf Ukraine. So tomorrow's a bit of a special event, but I look forward to David joining the chaos tomorrow. Today, however, we're doing a half-hour episode. We're going to be cutting this off pretty clean because I have a sort of personal thing I need to go and do later. Yeah, half hour of concentrated stuff because goodness, there's a lot of stuff going on. David, do you want to say a couple of words to introduce yourself and your platforms, etc.?
Yeah, as Jonathan said, we've got an abbreviated episode today, so I just want to very briefly mention my YouTube channel, which is No Delusion Zone. Folks, please go there, No Delusion Zone, and please subscribe, hit the subscribe button. Also, when you get a chance, go to my Substack, which is protectingtherepublic.com. So No Delusion Zone here on YouTube and protectingtherepublic.com. Jonathan, as I told you, I just had a great conversation with Adam Dunnigan, who's running for Congress in Virginia. And that's going to be on my YouTube channel and also on my Substack. So please, I ask folks to go there for a fascinating interview of just a conversation, actually, just over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes.
I look forward to seeing that, actually, because Adam's been on Silicon Curtain.
Yes.
He is a rising star and not afraid to speak his mind, which is, I think, super important at this point. We are way beyond consensus politics. We are way beyond the political elites.
Well, Jonathan, I think for the folks, most of your viewers are from the UK, of course, and even the ones that tuned in to me earlier. I would really encourage those of you who are not from the United States to watch this interview, this conversation I had with Adam, because he really does represent the best of us. He is such an anti-MAGA that I think it would be very refreshing for you folks to hear the kind of person that I hope will be part of the next Congress in the United States.
And at the moment, it is part of the resistance. And I think that is incredibly, incredibly important. And this bit, I wanted to sort of launch into this bit about speaking your mind, because that really is the sort of theme today. And why it's so important in a democracy to have sometimes within certain rules and frameworks, a fairly combative attitude towards one's opponents, and not this kind of soft consensus that sort of sane washes everything. And I think the media fall for that as well. But we are going to look at it in an interesting context, because the thumbnail of the video is depicting this incredibly effective Iranian propaganda. Now, I need to put a little caveat out there, which is the Iranian regime is still vile. It's a vile, theocratic regime that slaughters its own people. So there's no lessons to be had there. It's a regime that, well, the world would be a lot better if, frankly, it didn't exist. How it ceases to exist, of course, is important. Trump hasn't overturned it, and indeed his schemes have not been able to achieve that. But what we are seeing coming out is incredibly effective combat propaganda. And it is effective because it is able to surgically and brutally diagnose the problems in the US. Of course, it doesn't touch the problems in its own regime, and that's important to mention. But what's your take on what you've seen?
Well, you're right. I mean, the Iranian propaganda has been brilliant, and I absolutely hate the Iranian regime. I have since 1979, when the Islamic Revolution took over. I was on active duty at that time, and I vividly remember what happened, and they've gotten worse over the years. So they are horrible. Like you said, the world would be a lot better off if they didn't exist. However, you can't take it away from them. They've got some really, really sharp people, at least in the propaganda sphere. They are very digitally aware. And a lot of the memes and the videos that they've come out with about the war, you're right. I mean, they've been showing things and pointing out things in American culture that the American media really doesn't talk about, because words and images are important. And the American media, the mainstream media, are cowards, and they don't seem to want to touch on any of that. And I'm not glad that the Iranians are doing that, but they are. And one last thing I'll say about that, Jonathan, is that what this war has done, as opposed to not only not changing the regime in Iran, they have increased the status of the entire country, including the government of Iran, way up there. Whereas now they're a player. For better or for worse, they are far more important, and people are listening to them than they ever would have if this war had never started.
And do you think that just represents a sort of desperation, or actually is there something innovative in what Iran's doing? And does it also perhaps reflect not the sense that the regime is in a desperate position, besieged by its own people, which actually was the position before this war began, but actually is exuding a kind of self-confidence by going on the attack like this?
Absolutely. Well, look, they are taking whatever advantage of the few means to defend themselves that they can, and one of the ways that they can is through these videos, through these memes, through online, through social media. They have affected more damage to the West, to America, to Trump in particular, than if they had a whole series of more sophisticated weapons. So they're, unfortunately, doing a very, very good job. But they still, Jonathan, do have a sizable arsenal of real weapons, not the kind that America has at, several million or billion per shot, but they've got tens of thousands of drones and rockets and missiles and high-speed attack boats and so forth and so on. So they are not undefended, but their biggest weapon so far is propaganda, and it's doing pretty good.
Now, what we also have is, I'm going to call it the bogus blockade. That's not what I get of the blockade, is that it's not actually clear what the strategic outcome of that blockade is supposed to be, nor the kind of risks that have been run by implementing the blockade. So, for instance, Hormuz may be blocked, or Iranian ports specifically may be blocked for export, but that then puts the US in direct confrontation with China, for instance. Do they really want to go down that route? That in itself could perhaps trigger a Taiwan operation. If China feels that it's already in a confrontation with the US, well, it may feel that it's got nothing to lose in those circumstances. It could also be the case, and we're starting to see some of those signs, something you've been mentioning multiple times, is that if the US blocks Hormuz for Iranian traffic and its allies and trading partners, then they could almost certainly block the Red Sea route using the proxy Houthis, etc. So I think, again, a lot of the media are thinking, whoa, the Iran thing, that's all over. Now, what we've got here could be just a calm before the real storm.
Well, yes, I've said it many, many times. And not only is this a foolhardy effort, this blockade of a blockade, but let me just read something that is totally apropos and relevant to what we're talking about today. And this comes from The Atlantic. Very briefly, the war will affect the American and global economies in ways that most Americans still don't understand. Even if the shooting stops today, the Arab Gulf states will need to spend the next several years rebuilding infrastructure while also rearming. The ripple effects of those rebuilding and rearmament efforts will be felt throughout the American economy. Money from the Gulf has fueled many of the investments in artificial intelligence over the last few years, both through direct investments in startups and through indirect placements in US-based capital or venture capital funds. Now, the sovereign wealth vehicles of the Gulf will likely need to deploy more capital at home, curtailing investments abroad. We ain't seen nothing yet, Jonathan, in terms of the economic devastation that's going to occur here in the States for sure, but also throughout the world, the UK, Europe, and even Asia. And I just want to throw this out quickly and I'll get your opinion on this. What happens, and I think it's inevitable, when either a Chinese flagged vessel or a Chinese naval vessel that is escorting a Chinese flagged vessel is interdicted or attempted to be interdicted by the American Navy? What kind of a confrontation is that going to be? And what do you believe the result's going to be?
Well, I think there's an interesting and parallel process. We'll come to that. I'm not deflecting, but there's a parallel process to that, which is that Russian ships through, let's say, the Baltic Sea, the English Channel, the North Sea, etc., they are starting to be guarded by Russian maritime assets as well. So we're not just talking necessarily about confrontation. I think we're going to see the weaponization of all sorts of trade routes. I think Trump is probably the most desperate he's been. So, rather than look at it as a sort of tactical strategic problem, I think it's worth inverting it and saying, how desperate is Trump? How desperate is he? What scale of a crisis does he need in order to save his skin for a few more days, weeks, months? Which ties in with what we talked about yesterday, which was Melania. She knows something's coming. She wants to protect her Botoxed ass. No, that's not an implication there. I have no idea whether she's actually had work on that or not. That's just a bit of alliteration or whatever. But anyway, she knows something's coming. Other people know something's coming. He will know something's coming. And along with the alleged dementia and everything else, he must know, he must have a real idea of how much trouble he's in, especially as he is now spending so much of his time arguing with people who were propping his regime up. So the question is, what scale of crisis does Donald Trump need to save himself? The answer, of course, is quite worrying. And it may escalate out not just to Iran, but to Cuba and other places. And he's also mentioned Greenland several times in the last week. Again, we're back to the whole Greenland thing. He's going to keep going. He's going to keep sort of pouring petrol on all of these fires to keep his name out of the headlines in conjunction with Epstein and all the rest. I think that's unfortunately the lens to look at it through, not a rational lens. And if we also look at Putin, who's getting more and more desperate, who has acknowledged there are economic problems for the first time, really. He's obviously not owned up to the causes of those, of which he is the cause, but he has acknowledged that all is not well in his little Russian empire there. You have essentially a dictator and a would-be dictator who are desperate to cling on to what is left of their power and control. Well, these people will pour whatever petrol it takes on these fires in order to protect themselves.
Absolutely. And with Trump, you've not only got a cornered animal, you've got a lunatic, demented cornered animal who will do almost anything, as you said, to protect his skin. Look, this just came out yesterday. We already have, the United States, about 50,000 troops, in addition to 3 aircraft carriers and numerous other vessels in the area of the Persian Gulf, in and around the Gulf, Red Sea, Mediterranean, so forth. Just yesterday, the story came out that Trump ordered 10,000 more additional troops there from various units, the 82nd Airborne and Rangers and more special operators and so forth and so on. So I think what he's going, or at least the options that he's thinking about, is to actually initiate some kind of ground action, Jonathan. I think that's just inevitable, because that will be a major disaster and a catastrophe for us, the United States and the world. But what better thing to do to divert from what's going on with the Epstein files? He also is going to do something with Cuba. That just keeps coming up. There's been a couple of anonymous sources in the last 24 hours or so that have come forth saying that Cuba is in the cards, that's just inevitable. Something's going to happen there. You mentioned Greenland is still not off the table. It's not. So he has any number of things that he can do. So I believe a ground war of some kind is going to happen in Iran, some kind of an action in Cuba, and God knows what happens with Greenland also.
Yeah, I mean, this is ironic, isn't it? Given Eldridge, Colby, and others basically making the case that America cannot sustain wars on more than one front, which was one of their main arguments for withdrawing assistance to Europe, Ukraine, etc., because they had to focus on China and the Pacific. So what's actually happened? Venezuela, Iran, Greenland, they've focused and concentrated their resources and their bandwidth on anything but countering China. In fact, got themselves so bogged down in the Middle East. And if what you say comes to pass, then this is going to be bogged down to, a far greater extent than they currently are. This gives maybe not Russia leeway to fulfill its global ambitions because it is contracting in terms of its global power and reach. In some ways, Iran is superseding Russia, certainly as a regional power, and China. I think will be pleased to see that Russia is really fading left, right, and center. But what it means, of course, is that China has its way clear, not only to expand its reach, to expand its control, expand its influence, but to carry on using, in some ways, Russia and Iran as proxies to attrit its main adversary. This is clever. We are, in my view, in a global struggle for hegemonic dominance, and China has somehow been able to either engineer it or is using a situation that it hasn't engineered. We don't quite know, but it's able to sit back and it's letting these sort of quasi-proxies, Iran and Russia, basically destroy the US, and of course the US destroy itself from the inside out. It's masterful.
Well, whether or not China actually orchestrated this behind the scenes, overtly, covertly, or not, they are the biggest winner in this, Jonathan. I'm sorry. I know it's been debated recently whether Russia or China is the biggest winner. Russia's not going to win. You know this. They're on the skids. They're on the downward slope for a number of reasons, regardless of how high the oil prices go. Their days are numbered. China is just the biggest winner in this. And they may not have done anything. Whether or not they did, they're basically sitting back. And I've said this before, not only do they have a ringside seat as to American strategy and tactics, which will just enable them to progress much faster in the development of their own military, they are now seen as the adult in the room. Whether or not countries want to, they are going to have to deal now more with China, at least on the economic front and the diplomatic front, countries that used to deal with America because we, the United States, can't be trusted anymore. And as much as you want to say bad about China, and there's a lot, they want stability as long as they control it. They don't want the international economy to collapse because they want to control it. So they are the biggest winners in all of this. They're going to put their paws more so into Europe's economy, into Africa, where they've already got their tentacles out. And their military is going to develop far faster than it would have had America not done what they've done in Iran. They are, the opposite of that series, the biggest loser. They are the biggest winner in this war.
It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that this is all being engineered by Donald Trump, a man who did the impossible, which was to bankrupt a casino. I mean, surely casinos at that point were a license to print money, and it's next to nigh impossible to destroy that kind of economic resource. But he's managed to bankrupt all sorts of businesses and come up with a fair few ludicrous concepts. So it's not perhaps that ironic that he will bankrupt the US, destroy its business model, has no conception, not just of diplomacy, soft power, all the rest, which of course he's decimated, but also the fundamental business model, which was in Europe: we protect you, we absolve you from the full need to become militarized countries and economies. In return, you buy our stuff. I think this is the thing that has not been talked about nearly enough, is that in the short and medium term, he's costing the US billions and eroding its reputation. In the long term, by forcing Europe to fund its own defense and making American defense equipment insanely unattractive because it comes with all sorts of psychological pressure and risk, etc. He's actually costing the US trillions in future revenue.
Well, what the mainstream media in America keeps missing is that when originally Donald Trump was just a grifter, before he even became a politician. Once he became the president, he became a super grifter. So his main goal was to make as much money for himself as he can. And he did very, very well. But in the last, I don't know if it's 1 year, 2 years, or whatever, his cognitive ability has just failed. He is a lunatic. He is mentally ill. He has serious behavioral issues. So it's not even a matter now of him wanting to become richer, to grift more, to steal money. He is just a 3-year-old lashing out, throwing tantrums. There's no rationale to it. Before, his only rationale was making money and getting even with his perceived enemies. He could think that far. Now he's not even thinking that irrationally. It's just total reaction, like an adolescent would have when you tell him no. And the American media, the mainstream media, and his most fervent supporters still don't get that. Until Donald Trump is dealt with by the American public, the mainstream media, and European leaders as to what he really is, which is a very, very sick and dangerous individual, this is just going to get worse. European leaders just convened a meeting, Jonathan, which I think you know, where they pretty much said, we don't want you anymore. We don't even want you in NATO. So if you want to go, don't let the door hit you in the ass as you leave. We don't want you in any other institutions, any other groups that we are a part of. You don't want to be in NATO? Bye-bye. We don't want you in Europe. So they are finally getting it. The American people need to get that, and the American mainstream media needs to shout that out loud and clear.
That is going to be my question, actually, and we should certainly bring this up tomorrow. So we are not big fans of Mark Rutte and his endless, I would say, butt kissing. Do you think, and you can tell me I'm delusional, do you think there is another plan here? Is he smart enough? Is he clever enough actually to, behind the scenes, being helping Europe to say, we're going to prepare for NATO without the US? Or perhaps is Mark Rutte, part of this sort of Trumpian delusion, and partners are planning without Rutte? Where do you think he is in all of this? And how much serious planning is being done by Europe for European defense without the US in NATO?
That's a good question. I think Mark Rutte is a coward. I don't think he, just like Trump, is not playing 4D chess like some people try to say, that this is all part of a plan. There's no plan. Mark Rutte is kissing his ass. For whatever reason, Mark Rutte thinks that his future is tied to Trump and MAGA. Yes, he said some things recently to barely try to distance himself from him. But no, I don't think that Mark Rutte is a covert agent working with NATO and Europe to try to help them out post Trump. I think what's going on right now with the European leaders, the NATO leaders, is that they're finally, getting the word that they finally get it, that Trump's insane. Not only that, he's dangerously insane, and he will drag them down if they don't make firm plans to operate and take action without him now, not tomorrow, not next year, now. So they're finally getting that. Giorgia Meloni is finally getting that. The insults to the Pope. You don't insult the Pope with an Italian leader. That's not good. So she finally has had it with Trump, I believe, and she was one of his fervent supporters. Jonathan, she I don't know if she really liked him, but she supported him publicly, no more. So I think Europe's finally getting it. The NATO leaders are finally getting it. No, I have no confidence in Mark Rutte at all. I won't even go on why I don't, but no, I don't trust him. And I don't think he's behind any positive efforts to try to help NATO post Trump.
I've always found Meloni fascinating because, yes, I mean, she has been one of the greatest allies, I would say, of MAGA, and she was often included in amongst, I would say, all these sort of illiberal partners and voices around the world that form part of that. But I think what she's pulled off is an extraordinary trick, in that she's also pro-Ukraine, and she was not pro-Orban, despite being, conservative. She wasn't picking fights with the US, but definitely has a whole series of red lines, has actual values that underpin the conservatism that is part of her administration. This brings us back to Hungary. I think the answer to illiberal, theocratic conservatism, or figures that have clothed themselves in the language of conservatism without really being conservative, either fiscally conservative or conservative in their social values, etc. The answer to this is not, radical leftism, although that's fine. It has a role in the political debate. The real thing that is going to counter it and divide it and actually slay this monster, which has to be slayed, is fiscally and socially responsible conservatism that actually goes back to some core foundations and core values of which Trump has trampled all over them, trampled over every single one of them.
Well, the answer is just what you're saying. It's called centrism. I had that same discussion just now with Adam Dunnigan about how the Democrats can and should win back the voting public in America, which is to get rid of the far radical leftists. Platforms that they've been concentrating on, and try to speak to the problems that the American public, the average American, really cares about. That's what Magyar did in Hungary. Look, he's no far leftist. If anything, he's about as right as Orban was. He just, he confessed that this was a corrupt, terrible government. And yes, we need to concentrate on fiscal responsibility. We need to concentrate on what the average Hungarian needs. I'm against unlimited immigration, just as Orban was. But I'm also against corruption. So that's how he won. And that's how in America, the Democrats can win. That's how any of the politicians in Germany or all over Europe can win. Just get off their high horse with radical policies, left or right, and concentrate what the average person wants. Don't give up their values or their nationalistic fervor or patriotism. Just talk to the average person and tell them that you're with them. That, you may disagree on this and that. You may be a little bit more liberal here or there, but basically you get their needs and you're going to help them to try to achieve that. And you're against all the corruption that's been happening with the far right and the fascists. One last thing I'm going to ask you. There's been an MIA, a missing person here. What's old Fizo doing these days? I haven't heard from him.
No idea.
Is he hiding out now as the
keeping his
lone
head down,
fascist in NATO, or what?
Well, yeah, I guess he's keeping his head down. I mean, he perhaps was not or is not so overtly in the Kremlin's pocket. Some people will tell me, hang on a second, what are you talking about? But he also brings, and he's not coming from the right, of course, he's coming from the left.
Yeah.
But this is the old horseshoe theory, where the extremes kind of actually join in the middle. He is also, as far as I can tell, known also for a degree of corruption and nepotism.
Oh yeah.
And all sorts of issues there. So I think rather than defining it as a left-right issue, I think we have to ask ourselves, who is for increasing freedom, who is for rule of law, who is for, let's say, as liberalizing their economies, but within very strong frameworks and with a foundation of values, not just believing, the market can solve everything, but of course it can't. The market tends to create efficiencies in some areas and create monopolies in others. So you have to kind of manage that stuff. This battle is not over. And I think this is the lesson that we have to draw from this. It's not just about Orban. It's about an endless tide of illiberalism, an endless tide of nepotism. That battle has been seen to be lost in the last couple of years. And it's not because illiberalism is so powerful and strong or has any, sound philosophical underpinnings. No, it's because it met a vacuum. It's because it didn't get any pushback. I think this is the lesson of all of this. What Ukraine shows us is you have to be prepared to fight. You have to have solid ideas, political tools in order to fight this stuff. It will win if it meets with no resistance. And I think that lesson is super important for the US.
The way forward is to disavow far left and far right platforms. Stay with the centrist platforms. Stay with what you know people need. Be against corruption and fascism, and be against the Kremlin. If you can do that, if you can say we don't want the Soviet Union coming back to Europe, but we don't want the corruption that these leaders have been putting us through for the last however many decades in this country too. Let's be patriotic. Let's be nationalist and populist. But for God's sake, let's not invite back the Soviet Union, and let's clean up our own house and serve the average person, whether you're in Hungary, the Czech Republic, Poland, Italy, whatever. And you know what? I think politicians that say and do that are going to win.
I sincerely hope so. That's where we're going to have to cut off, I think, at this point. But we will continue a lot of these things tomorrow in the marathon. I look forward to seeing you there. We will have Yuri Rashkin with us. So I think that'll make for a lively conversation and a lot of like-minded sort of ideas there. Thank you to everyone who's added such brilliant comments today and for all your support and moderation. I look forward to seeing you on the marathon tomorrow.
See you all soon. Thanks.